So this lesson's focused on human body systems, the major body systems. It's kind of an introduction to the fundamentals involved in all of our assessments. The terms we're going to look at are respiration, and then hypoxia, and then perfusion. We're going to talk about how those all relate to keep human bodies healthy and active, and how we can assess for problems there and begin to treat those problems. This is Mrs. Smith. She's our main customer. We need to figure out how to help her in any way that we can. One of the first ways is to assess her major body systems and their function. Not only does Mrs. Smith, is she concerned about herself, but she's also concerned about her family and friends. They all can have problems with perfusion, with hypoxia, with respiration, and all these major body systems need to be working right in order for things to go well for the Smiths and her friends. So that's Mrs. Smith's body. And what are some body systems that she needs to have working in order for her to stay alive? We're going to name some body systems. What, Jordan?
Respiratory.
Okay. We're going to say respiratory, which I'm going to write as pulmonary. Okay. Other body systems, big body systems. Cardiovascular. Good with CV as a...
The GI tract.
Okay, we have GI. What's command and control? Can we use neuro for that? So brain and spinal cord. What other systems are in there? Reproductive, genitourinary, skin, musculoskeletal. Okay, but really, heart, lungs, brain, and I'd even let you have kidney. That's big organs, right? Heart, lung, brain, kidney. Big body systems. So we could dig into each one of those systems in depth, and textbooks kind of tend to do that, and that's okay. But we think that there's probably a more simple way to start with this and to kind of conceptualize this. And so that's how we're going to. The most basic building block of all these body systems that we're talking about is the cell. So we need to spend a little time talking about what keeps cells alive, what helps cells make energy so cells can do cell business. And just realize that cells get together and form tissues. A number of tissues form an organ. And then organs get together and form body systems. And that's what we're talking about here in terms of looking at major body systems, how those are functioning, what the problems are. But you have to break it down into what that individual cell needs. The cells need to make energy. In order to do whatever that cell is supposed to do, it needs energy in order to do that. If it's a brain cell, it needs energy in the form of glucose to take care of its function in the brain. If it's a cell in the toe, then toe cells also need glucose. All cells in the body need glucose. They need food in order to generate some energy and to do what they're supposed to do. So when we talk about cells making energy, we need to talk about metabolism. And we have anaerobic metabolism, where there is not oxygen available, not sufficient oxygen available to that cell to make its energy. And each cycle through, each glucose molecule that's used generates two of these little energy units, little ATPs, or see those as just units of energy. So with anaerobic metabolism, which keeps on going, as long as there's glucose to burn, the glucose is converted into energy in that way. But if we can add oxygen, then we have the same process that continues on. Two little energy molecules are made, and then additional processes go into place. The Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, there's additional processes that go on, and the next step, two more energy molecules are made. So just by adding oxygen, we've already doubled the amount of energy that we can come up with. And then in that final process in the chain, a number of additional energy molecules are made, 30 or so additional energy molecules are made. And there's some waste products that we'll talk about after a while. Particularly carbon dioxide is generated there. That's a waste product that we need to carry away. But certainly by adding oxygen to this metabolism, and anaerobic metabolism can continue and aerobic metabolism can occur on top of that, in addition to that, and we get a tremendous amount of energy, very efficient, very effective way to make energy for cells. So the bottom line here is that in order for cells to thrive and do cell business that they need to be doing, we need not only glucose for the anaerobic portion of the equation, but we need to add oxygen so that we can increase that energy production by 19 or 20 times more than we would have had if we just stayed with anaerobic. The respiratory system is the first of the three big body systems that we'll talk about that support this delivery of oxygen so that cells can make energy and do what cells are supposed to do. The respiratory system can be thought of as an upside-down tree, where we have the root and trunks of the tree, the main trunk of the tree, and then it branches into large limbs and then smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally, the leaves on the tree would be these microscopic air sacs each one's called an alveolus. More than one alveolus is called an alveoli. And the alveoli are covered with the tiniest of blood vessels, capillaries, and that's where the oxygen and carbon dioxide, the air, can interface with the bloodstream. It's important that the structures in the respiratory system be intact, that there not be obstructions in the upper airway, obstructions in the trachea, or any of several ways to obstruct bronchioles, the small tubules on the way to the air sacs, or to obstruct the air sacs or have destruction of the air sacs. So there's quite a lot to talk about there as we delve into the respiratory system, but for now the main thing to understand is that the bronchial tree, upside-down tree, and the real concern for us is to keep the leaves on the tree, the tiny air sacs, the alveoli, open, receiving good air, and able then to mix with the bloodstream. Here you see a cross-section cutaway, kind of zoomed-in view of pulmonary capillaries surrounding the alveoli. And each alveolus is surrounded by multiple capillaries. And the key thing to know here is that this interface here that occurs is only a cell or two thick. And so it's very important that that interface stay intact, not be damaged from swelling, from toxic gases, from smoking. And the alveoli is the key piece in the pulmonary tree. It is the leaf in the tree. There are hundreds of millions of these alveoli, and we need them to be functioning correctly and available to take in air to mix with the bloodstream. Here's another view of the pulmonary capillaries encircling the alveoli, the tiniest of the air sacs. And the magic that happens here in this very thin, one cell or so thick interface is that the pulmonary capillary is right next to the wall of that alveolus, and gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, can diffuse into and out of the bloodstream. So real quickly, diffusion is basically the process where gases try to even out across a membrane. So if there's a lot of oxygen on one side of a membrane, such as the membrane here between the capillary and the alveolus, if there's a lot of oxygen on one side and not as much on the other, diffusion occurs where the oxygen levels tend to even out across that membrane. And the same thing occurs with carbon dioxide. So as we breathe in air, that air should be very rich in oxygen compared to the amount of oxygen in the bloodstream in the lungs. And so oxygen will tend to diffuse into the blood, out of the air sac, and into the blood. And carbon dioxide, in reverse, is very in high concentration in the bloodstream. It's been brought back from the cells. Remember, it was a byproduct of energy conversion, of metabolism in the cells, and CO2 was produced and then is carried back to the lungs, and so the bloodstream coming back to the lungs is very high in CO2. The air that's in the alveolus is very low in CO2, and those two gases will also diffuse across that membrane and tend to even out. So diffusion, as far as we're concerned at this point, is the ability of gases in the lungs to even out across a membrane so that their concentrations become the same on both sides of that membrane. And that's how we're able to get oxygen into the blood and carbon dioxide out of the blood. And this all occurs in the alveolus, where the alveolus is encircled by a number of pulmonary capillaries. It's a key point to understand how respiration occurs and how we're able to get oxygen into the bloodstream and deliver it to the cells so the cells can use it to make energy efficiently and in sufficient quantity. So we're talking now about the delivery system. We've talked about the respiratory system that brings in the oxygen to be delivered. The gastrointestinal system brings in the glucose to be delivered, but something has to deliver the oxygen to the cells, and something has to transport the waste products, the trash, the CO2, carbon dioxide, away from the cells. And we show that as two different mechanisms, although they both work in the bloodstream. So the circulatory system, the heart and all the blood vessels, have messengers in there, have delivery devices in there, and so red blood cells we're going to look at as the delivery mechanism to get oxygen out to the body cells. Red blood cells in the pulmonary capillaries wrapped around the alveoli. Red blood cells are the FedEx trucks that pick up the oxygen and carry them out to the cells. There is some carbon dioxide that is also loaded on those red blood cells and brought back. But for the most part, carbon dioxide is dissolved in the bloodstream and is brought back out to the lungs in a different mechanism, and dissolved in the bloodstream and actually carried as bicarbonate. So we're showing that as a separate mechanism, a trash truck in this case. Hope that metaphor holds up for you. The cardiovascular system is made up of the heart and then the major arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, major veins that return back to the heart. In general, arteries take blood away from the heart. Veins bring blood back to the heart. The heart can be considered to be a double-sided pump. The left side of the heart, on the right side of our picture, but the left side of the heart pumps to the body through the aorta and the arterial system, and the left side of the heart is key because it pumps into the high-pressure system that is the systemic circulation. That's where the blood cells are delivered to the various tissues and the various cells out in the body, where the oxygen's dropped off, CO2 is picked up, and the cells use that oxygen in their metabolism to make energy. The right side of the heart is involved with taking blood that has come back from the body and pumping it to the lungs, where the bloodstream can then encircle those alveoli and the diffusion can occur, and then blood returns back to the left side of the heart where it's pumped out to the rest of the systemic circulation. Your blood is made up of red cells, white cells, plasma, a number of things. The red cells are what we're focusing on. The red cells are the FedEx truck. They are the transport mechanism to get that oxygen out to the cells and the tissues in the body. And there are hundreds of millions of these. And each red cell has numerous hemoglobin molecules on it. And those hemoglobin molecules are actually where the oxygen rides. That's where they are attached, where the oxygen rides to the systemic circulation. So your bloodstream is made up of lots of things. Red blood cells are what we're talking about right now. And so one of the things that would need to be going on is that you have a sufficient number of red blood cells and that you have a sufficient volume of blood in order to transport the oxygen out to the periphery and to the tissues. You have a series of blood vessels in your body. that must be intact, should not be leaking, should not have obstructions, whether it be a clot or a clog that has formed there due to some plaque buildup. And so it's important to have a sufficient number of red blood cells, a sufficient volume of blood, and an intact container made up of blood vessels, a vascular container, that is the arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins. The whole system needs to be intact and not have obstructions and have sufficient volume of blood circulating through it in order to do this delivery that we need. We need the oxygen delivered to the cells, the CO2 waste products picked up from the cells and brought back. And so you can sort of see how the respiratory system is responsible for getting air in and out, to bring in fresh air and exhaust used up air full of carbon dioxide. And the circulatory system is responsible for delivering that through the heart by pumping it around, the vascular system by being an intact container, and then the fluid, the blood, in the vascular system, where the oxygen rides, where the carbon dioxide comes back, and the whole process has to be intact with those three big body systems, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, and that third body system, the neurosystem, the brain, that is in command and control of all this that's going on. That's controlling the rate of the respiration, the rate of breathing, the heart rate, the size of the container. The brain can control whether the blood vessels are constricted or dilated, whether they're large or small. And so big three body systems, respiratory brings the air in, gets rid of exhaust, circulatory system takes the oxygen out to the cells, brings CO2 back, and the neurosystem, the neurological system, is in charge of the whole thing, regulates it, makes sure that things are as they're supposed to be. So we'll introduce a couple of terms real quick here. You'll notice that the first four letters in each of these is hypo, which means low. In the case of hypoxia or hypoxia, you can guess that that means low oxygen. So hypoxia is the situation where you have inadequate levels, low levels of oxygen in the cells, which you remember would then not allow you to have aerobic metabolism. It would mean you had to rely only on anaerobic metabolism, that you wouldn't have any of that oxygen in order to produce sufficient quantities of energy very efficiently. And so in a situation where you have hypoxia, you're going to have anaerobic metabolism only. You're not able to add that aerobic metabolism on top of it. What can cause you to be hypoxic? Well, it's the lack of oxygen in the cells. Well, what causes that? Well, it could be the lack of oxygen being brought in to the respiratory system. Or it could be that the respiratory system is not able to get that air to the alveoli, to the tiny air sacs, where it can mix with the bloodstream. Or it could be that the bloodstream is the problem. There's not enough red blood cells in the bloodstream. Or there's not enough blood in the bloodstream. Or the heart's not pumping well. Or there's a leak in the container system. Or the container system is not the right size because the neurological system, the brain, the command and control, is not appropriately controlling that container size. So a lot of things can play into that. When you have hypoperfusion, we need to define what the term perfusion means. Perfusion is the circulation. It is the delivery of blood to cells. So when you have normal perfusion, you have blood being delivered to cells in the periphery of the body, and a red blood cell makes about 3 trips a minute. About every 20 seconds or so, a blood cell goes out to a cell in the periphery, drops off, picks up, comes back, and gets circulated around. So hypoperfusion is when there's inadequate circulation, there's inadequate delivery of blood to the cells, and that could be a cause for hypoxia. Remember, hypoxia is low oxygen at the cells, which could be because there's not enough O2 coming in, or the O2 that's coming in is fine, but it's not being delivered around appropriately. So hypoxia and hypoperfusion, those are the two things that kill Mrs. Smith and her family and friends. And so we need to focus on how to assess hypoxia, hypoperfusion, how to treat it, prevent it if possible, and that is the major focus of EMS care: identifying hypoxia, identifying hypoperfusion, and treating those two primary killers of Mrs. Smith and her friends.